What if the person emptying your office trash could solve a problem that's been stumping your entire engineering team for months? What if genius wore a custodian's uniform and pushed a mop cart through your hallways every night while you slept? This is the story of Daniel Reeves, a 52-year-old night janitor who walked into a tech company's war room at 3 a.m. and cracked a code that had brought a billion-dollar company to its knees. What he did next didn't just change his life. It exposed a truth about talent, prejudice, and the invisible barriers we build around success that most of us are too comfortable to acknowledge. TechVantage Solutions was bleeding money. Their flagship product, a cloud security platform used by half the Fortune 500, had a critical bug: random data corruption, unexplained crashes, client threats to sue. The company's 50-person engineering team had been working around the clock for 3 months, burning through their runway while their stock price nosedived. Sarah Chun, the 34-year-old CTO and company co-founder, barely slept anymore. She'd converted a conference room into a war room, whiteboards covered in algorithms and desperate theories. Every solution they tried failed. Every fix created 2 new problems. The pressure was crushing her, and everyone could see it. Daniel Reeves had a different kind of pressure. He worked the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 6 days a week. He'd been with TechVantage for 4 years, ever since the company moved into the downtown Portland office tower. His job was simple: clean the floors, empty the trash, restock the bathrooms, and stay invisible. Most employees never noticed him. Those who did offered polite nods or awkward smiles before hurrying away. Daniel preferred it that way. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility meant nobody asked questions about his past, about why a man with his background was pushing a janitorial cart through a tech company at midnight. But Daniel had a secret that would have shocked every person in that building. 25 years ago, he'd been Dr. Daniel Reeves, a computer science prodigy who'd earned his PhD from MIT at 23. He'd worked at Bell Labs, published groundbreaking papers on distributed systems, and held patents that formed the backbone of modern cloud computing. Then his wife got cancer. Stage 4. The treatments drained their savings, then their retirement, then everything they'd built. When she died, Daniel fell apart. Depression swallowed him whole. He lost his job, then his house, then his will to code. For years, he drifted: homeless shelters, odd jobs, anything to survive. By the time he clawed his way back to stability, his resume had a 10-year gap no tech company would overlook. So he took what he could get: a janitor position that asked no questions and demanded no explanations. Every night, Daniel cleaned the war room last. He couldn't help himself. While emptying trash cans, his eyes would drift to the whiteboards covered in code. He'd see the engineers' attempted solutions, their logic errors, their fundamental misunderstandings of the architecture they'd built. His fingers would itch. Part of him wanted to grab a marker and show them where they'd gone wrong. But who would listen to a janitor? Who would believe that the man scrubbing their coffee stains could see solutions they couldn't? So he stayed silent, wrestling with the knowledge that he could help, but knowing the world had already decided what he was worth. March 22nd changed everything. Daniel arrived at 11 p.m. to find the war room in chaos. Sarah Chun sat alone at the conference table, her head in her hands, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and crumpled papers. The rest of the engineering team had finally gone home, defeated and exhausted. Daniel knocked softly on the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Chun. Just need to empty the trash." She looked up with red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment, Daniel saw something he recognized: the same broken desperation he'd felt when his wife died. The look of someone who'd run out of options and didn't know how to keep going. Sarah laughed bitterly, a sound with no humor in it. "You know what, Daniel? That's your name, right?" He nodded. "We're finished. 3 months, 50 brilliant engineers, and we can't fix this bug. Our biggest client just threatened to sue for $20 million. We'll be bankrupt by June." She gestured at the whiteboard covered in incomprehensible equations and code snippets. "Fix this code and I'll promote you," she said, the words dripping with exhausted sarcasm. "Hell, I'll make you CTO if you can tell me what we're missing." She expected nothing. It was the delirious joke of someone who'd lost everything and stopped caring about propriety. Daniel stood frozen, his trash bag hanging from his hand. Every instinct screamed at him to stay silent, to protect himself, to keep his head down and survive. But he looked at Sarah's broken expression and saw his wife in those final hospital days, and something in him cracked open. "May I?" he asked quietly, pointing at the whiteboard. Sarah blinked in confusion but waved him forward. "Sure, why not? Maybe the janitor will solve what 50 engineers couldn't." The words were meant to be dismissive, but Daniel was already moving, his eyes scanning the code with an intensity that made Sarah sit up straighter. He picked up a marker with hands that trembled slightly. "Your problem isn't the code," he said softly. "It's your assumption about the architecture." Then he began to write. His hand moved across the whiteboard with the fluid confidence of someone who'd spent decades living in this abstract world of logic and systems. He drew diagrams showing data flow patterns the engineers had missed. He identified a race condition in the distributed caching layer, something so subtle that it only manifested under specific load conditions. His explanation was clear, methodical, and devastatingly accurate. Within 10 minutes, he'd mapped out not just the problem, but 3 potential solutions, each with detailed implementation notes. Sarah Chun stood slowly, her exhaustion forgotten, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning shock. Who are you?" Daniel set down the marker, suddenly aware of how much he'd just exposed. "I'm the janitor," he said simply. But Sarah was already at her laptop, pulling up his employee file, then running searches. Her hands flew across the keyboard, her expression growing more stunned with each click. "Dr. Daniel Reeves, MIT, Bell Labs. You published the foundational paper on distributed consensus algorithms. I cited your work in my master's thesis. You're a legend. What are you doing cleaning floors?" The story poured out of Daniel then. The loss, the grief, the years of wandering, the impossibility of coming back from the void. Sarah listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she made a decision that would define both their futures. She called an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. with every engineer and the entire executive team. When they arrived, confused and coffee-deprived, they found Daniel standing at the whiteboard. Sarah's introduction was simple. "This is Dr. Daniel Reeves. He solved our bug in 10 minutes last night. And as of this moment, he's our new principal architect." The room erupted in chaos. Engineers protested. HR panicked about protocols. The CFO questioned the liability. But Sarah shut them all down with a force that reminded everyone why she'd built this company from nothing. "For 3 months, we've been failing because we assume talent only exists in expected places. We've been so busy looking at resumes and credentials that we missed the genius emptying our trash cans. That ends today." She turned to Daniel. "You fix this bug, implement your solution, and prove it works. Then we'll talk about your permanent role here. But right now, I'm trusting the man who saw what 50 engineers couldn't." Daniel delivered. Within a week, the bug was fixed. Within 2 weeks, the solution was deployed. Within a month, TechVantage's stock price had recovered, and their biggest client had signed a contract extension worth $40 million. Daniel was officially named principal architect at a salary that would have seemed impossible when he was scrubbing floors. But more than that, he'd found his way back to himself. The first thing he did with his signing bonus was endow a scholarship at MIT for students who'd experienced major life disruptions, people society had written off, but who still had brilliance to offer the world. Sarah Chin became an advocate for what she called hidden talent recruitment. She started a program that partnered with homeless shelters, job retraining centers, and organizations serving people with employment gaps. TechVantage began hiring based on skills assessments rather than traditional resume screening. The results shocked the industry. A former truck driver became their best UX designer. A woman who'd spent 5 years caring for her dying parents turned out to be a natural product manager. A formerly incarcerated programmer developed their most innovative security feature. Within 2 years, TechVantage's diversity of experience, not just demographics, but actual life paths, became their competitive advantage. The tech industry took notice, though not everyone liked what they saw. A Stanford study that followed found that companies with non-traditional hiring practices showed 23% higher innovation rates and 31% better problem-solving capabilities than companies that relied solely on conventional recruitment. Why? Because people who've faced real adversity develop resilience, creativity, and perspective that can't be taught in any computer science program. They've learned to solve impossible problems with limited resources. They understand failure in ways that straight-line success stories never will. But accessing that talent requires something many companies lack: the humility to admit that genius doesn't always look like they expect. Daniel now speaks at tech conferences, though he's uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not special," he tells audiences who paid hundreds of dollars to hear him. "I'm just visible now. But there are thousands of people like me, brilliant, capable, ready to contribute, who society has decided aren't worth a chance. They're driving your Uber. They're stocking your grocery store shelves. They're cleaning your offices while you sleep." The question isn't whether talent exists in unexpected places. The question is whether you're brave enough to look. His words make people uncomfortable, which is exactly his intention. Comfort, he's learned, is the enemy of progress. That TechVantage now has a policy. Every manager must spend 1 day a year working a service job: janitor, cafeteria worker, security guard. They must experience what it feels like to be invisible, to have people look through them rather than at them. The results have been transformative. Respect has become embedded in the culture. The company cafeteria worker who mentioned she'd studied graphic design in her home country is now in their marketing department. The security guard who casually solved a logic puzzle on someone's laptop is now in engineering. When you treat everyone with dignity and actually listen, you discover resources you never knew you had. But here's the hardest truth in this story. Daniel was lucky. Sarah Chun was exhausted enough, desperate enough, to let go of her assumptions for one moment. Most people in his position never get that moment. According to research from Harvard Business School, resumes with employment gaps of more than 6 months are 45% less likely to get interviews, regardless of the person's actual capabilities. We've built systems that punish life happening to people. We've decided that a straight line from degree to career is the only valid path to success. And in doing so, we're wasting human potential on a scale that should horrify us. 6 months after his promotion, Daniel returned to the night shift, not to clean, but to teach. Every Thursday evening, he runs a free coding boot camp for service workers at TechVantage. Security guards, janitors, cafeteria staff, anyone who wants to learn. Some of them will become programmers. Others will discover different talents. But all of them will know that someone sees them, believes in them, and is willing to invest in their potential. 3 of his students have already been hired by TechVantage. One of them was sleeping in his car when Daniel met him. Now he's debugging code that protects millions of users' data. The transformation isn't magic. It's just what happens when someone finally gets a real chance. Sarah Chun keeps a photo in her office. Daniel at that whiteboard at 3 a.m., marker in hand, solving the impossible problem. The caption reads, "Genius doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just waits quietly, hoping someone will finally pay attention." She looks at it whenever she's about to make a hiring decision, whenever she catches herself making assumptions about someone based on their current job or their resume gaps. It reminds her that the most important question isn't, "Where did you go to school?" or "What's your employment history?" The most important question is, "What can you do? And are we wise enough to give you the chance to show us?" So here's my challenge to you. Look around your life. Who are you not seeing? What assumptions are you making about people based on their job title, their appearance, their path? The barista who makes your coffee might be a brilliant writer waiting for encouragement. The delivery driver might be a gifted engineer who couldn't afford to finish college. The person society taught you to overlook might be exactly what your company, your community, your world needs most. Daniel Reeves didn't change. The code was always in him. What changed was that someone finally looked closely enough to see it. If this story challenged you, hit that like button and tell me in the comments about a time you discovered talent where you didn't expect it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that question our assumptions and remind us that human potential has no expiration date and no single path. Because the next time you see a janitor, a cashier, a security guard, remember Daniel. Remember that genius doesn't always wear the right credentials. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone brave enough to ask, "What else can you do?" And when you ask that question, when you really listen to the answer, you might just find that the person you've been looking for was right there all along, invisible only because you'd already decided not to see them.